My name is Major Kent Griffiths, and I retired from the Canadian Armed Forces with more than 43 years of service. Currently, I'm the Master of Ceremonies for the Field of Crosses sunrise and sunset ceremonies. The Field of Crosses was the concept of philanthropist Murray McCann, who was driving through a small town in Georgia when he saw crosses on the roadside that represented the fallen from that community. He thought it was a great idea and decided to do it in Calgary. He met with his friend George Bittman from the Poppy Fund, and together they came up with a scheme to do a similar field of crosses here in Calgary, Alberta. Currently, we put out 3,500 crosses to represent the fallen from southern Alberta. There are also 120 crosses that represent the 120,000 Canadian men and women who made that supreme sacrifice. Each year, hundreds of volunteers come out to help set up these crosses, and we host a sunrise and a sunset ceremony every day from the 1st to the 10th of November, and then of course we have a Remembrance Day ceremony on the 11th. This is a remarkable and sometimes shocking experience for the Calgarians who drive by and discover a vast cemetery where an empty field had been the day before. That way they can remember. They can remember those people who gave up all of their tomorrows for our todays. This cross represents Squadron Leader Ian Bazalgette, who earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Victoria Cross for his actions in World War II. He was 25 years old when he fell in 1944, and he is remembered by a school in his name here in Calgary.
Okay, so my name's Alison. I'm the curator here of the Air Force Museum, and I've been asked to talk about Ian Bazalgette, who won the Victoria Cross during the Second World War as a Canadian flying for the Royal Air Force. So he wasn't actually flying for the Royal Canadian Air Force, but the RAF instead. We had a lot of Canadians end up doing that at the time. But the main reason that Bazalgette is significant is he was a member of No. 8 Pathfinder Group. So, and that group grew up after they switched from daytime bombing in the first part of the war to nighttime bombing. The reason they had to make the switch was daytime bombing was actually quite dangerous. Obviously the enemy could see you coming and they could shoot you down with anti-aircraft fire or fighter support themselves. So they thought, okay, if we do this at night, this will be a little bit easier because we have the benefit of the cover of darkness. The problem, of course, with doing this kind of bombing at night is that finding your way, essentially the navigation piece, is very, very difficult because back then they didn't have a lot of, there was no GPS. So a lot of these guys are using sort of old-fashioned equipment, like so quite complex. So in order to fix the issue that they were having with bombing accuracy at night, they actually created this group called the Pathfinder Force, and it was No. 8 Group Pathfinder Force. So what they did to staff this unit is they pulled sort of the top pilots and navigators from a lot of the other bombing squadrons who had experience doing these missions and had a high rate of accuracy too, which meant obviously that they're good pilots and navigators. So Bazalgette was one of this group. He had initially been attached to No. 115 Squadron. Again, this was a British squadron. And he was recruited then into 635 Squadron, which was an RAF squadron, part of Pathfinder Force, to fly the big Lancaster bomber with a crew of 7 or 8. So what these guys would do then as Pathfinders is essentially they would fly to the target using very precise navigation. I have here an example. This is from 1945. Unfortunately, it's nothing directly from Bazalgette, but this is just a chart of all the fixes, the navigational fixes that this navigator, his name was Pierce, that he had to take. So you can see he's taking one at 1240, he takes another one at 1250, and this is just to track their progress throughout this whole thing so they're dead accurate on the target. So when they get to the target, they're not bombing it necessarily. Instead, what they're doing is dropping flares. And these flares indicate to the bomber group coming behind that that's where they're supposed to drop their bombs. So very complex work, as you can see, very finicky. So Bazalgette then, when he won his Victoria Cross, that action happened on the 4th of August, 1944. He was en route to Normandy. They had some storage caves there for the V-1 rocket. This was his target. He was heading there with his crew. He was the master bomber for this run, which meant that he himself had to be the one to get there to mark the target properly, because the deputy master bomber for this run had already been taken out. So he's en route. He's just over the target. His Lancaster is hit with really heavy anti-aircraft fire, which puts out all the engines in the left wing. So he's only got engines on the right-hand wing. Thankfully, it can still fly. He decides to press on to the target anyway, bombs the target accurately, but as the bombs get let go from the aircraft, it essentially sends it into an uncontrolled dive because of sudden release of weight. So when you only have engines on one side of the aircraft and it's plummeting towards the earth, it takes a lot of good piloting to get it back under control. One of the issues too is he wanted to order everybody to bail out because the thing was gonna crash, but he couldn't because 2 of his crew were really badly injured and too injured to get out essentially. So he told the guys who were able to get out, but the other 2, what he wanted to do was essentially crash land the thing. He'd done this once before earlier in the war with a separate Lancaster and had tried to crash land it in this time in August, but unfortunately pretty much as soon as he hit the ground, it exploded, and the combination of the explosion and the flames killed him and the 2 remaining crew members. So he got the Victoria Cross, of course, because the guys who'd bailed out earlier kind of lived, told about it, and they decided, yeah, he not only bombed the target effectively, but also came back and tried to save the remaining 2 crew members that were too injured to get out. So we have a school in Calgary named after him. He was initially from Calgary himself, so it's a very complex job, and I think he did it well.